G'day podcasters, welcome back to Season 4 of True Blue Conversations. I just want to give a shout out to our show sponsor, 25-4 Coffee, for Troopers, by Troopers. For all your coffee needs, head to www.254.com.au. G'day, welcome to True Blue Conversations. I'm Adam Bloom. Today, I'm coming to you live from Brisbane, and I have a very special guest for the podcast, Queensland Police Service Commissioner Katarina Carroll, APM, and she has joined us today to talk about her career in the Queensland Police and her life post when she's not working. So, Katarina, thank you for joining us.
Absolute pleasure to be here, Adam.
No, it's an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on, and thank you for giving me the time. I know how busy you are, so thank you. And can you tell us a little bit about you growing up? What did your early life look like?
So my parents came to Australia as immigrants in 1960. My first brother was born in New South Wales, and then they quickly moved to a little place in far north Queensland. I was born in Innisfail, and we moved to a little place after that called Ennett Hot Springs. Not many people have heard of Ennett Hot Springs, and it is a really tiny place just off the Tablelands. But they ended up buying a farm and grew tobacco for an extended period of time. So when I look back at my childhood, it was a lot of time on tractors, trucks, in the tobacco fields. Later, they extended that to commercial corn, harvesting, ploughing. And I did this alongside my brothers and other workers. We employed many, many workers over the years, as well as my parents. So it was a childhood of hard work, and I think that's where the work ethic comes from. But it was also fun. We had a very kind of independent life, riding around on motorbikes without helmets back then, in the bush. So it was a really fulfilling life, an enjoyable upbringing, and one with family alongside me, and one with many diverse cultures and backgrounds, because we employed many First Nations people, Italians, Greeks, Indians, and to me that's how I grew up. I knew no different, and it was, whilst we were poor, and we were in the beginning very poor, obviously that got better over the years. It was a wonderful upbringing.
So you mentioned that you had the not riding with a helmet on, and so a bit of a risk-taking behaviour back in the early days?
Yes, it was, because we knew no different, to tell you the truth. When I look at that now and I look at my own children, there is no way they would ever get on a bike without a helmet, let me tell you. But it was on a farm, and life was very different.
Absolutely.
And even the way that we drove, we're on tractors and trucks and all of that. But I think over the years, not only do yourself get better at assessing risk and, doing the right things, but society has as well. And as I said, there's no way I would let my children do some of the things I did growing up.
I think every parent can relate to that. So what was high school like for you? Did you always know that you were going to become a police officer?
So I went to boarding school from the age of 12, because we did live in a tiny place without a lot of high schools around us, and had to travel a long way to get to those high schools. So I went to a little Catholic boarding school, Mount St Bernard College in Herberton, from 12 to 17, and it was managed by Mercy Sisters. And I found it difficult the first couple of years. I'd never lived away from home. I was homesick, but eventually, you get through those things. And I loved my years at that boarding school. We were raised by strong women, highly educated, independent Sisters of Mercy. And as a result, I came into a very structured and disciplined environment. Again, hard-working. We had to do our own chores. I love sports, so I spent a lot of time, doing a lot of sport. And it was there that I met two of my closest friends, had fathers who were police officers, and both in really small country towns, Ravenshoe and Mount Surprise. And I used to travel to their place on the weekends and watch their fathers get dressed up in their uniforms, go out and interact with the community. And wow, I used to watch it in awe and think, I think I want to be a police officer. And that was from when I was about 15 years old.
And you obviously that's a very critical age too, because you're trying to work out what you want to do in life, and you followed through on that dream, and you joined the police at the young age of 19. And I can't imagine making life and death. I'm 30, and I think back to when I was 19, and I can tell you there was not much thinking of life and death, making decisions of that. Did that come into your thought process of you going into a very dangerous job, and what was it like at the academy for you?
It did in many ways, and I think my parents were even more terrified. And one of the reasons being is my parents came originally from Yugoslavia, where police really had a different role to what they have now, and they were terrified and almost somewhat embarrassed that I would choose a policing role because, coming from a communist country where police really were very different to what they are here, I think they spent many years hoping that I would not do that role. And eventually, supported us. But certainly from my perspective, I think about the background I came from and them not really being in favour of it, and the fact that it is quite dangerous. I think those early days for me I questioned myself, should I really be doing this? But I did have such a passion for it. And I think all 19-year-olds are quite different. Many are more mature than others. That comes from life experience, that comes from the people that work around you. We have excellent training at the academy. We have good, officers that support us. So with all of that and with my own upbringing, I think I was in a pretty good space to, enter into policing at that young age. I do look back and think, boy, you're a little bit overconfident. It's, you don't know what you don't know sometimes. It's not until you get older and you think, wow, if I'd known that, I probably would have made a better decision about some of those things back then.
Absolutely. And it's a key point you touch on with your family, being that it was sort of the police was looked down upon, but it's such in very looking from society, it's a very well-respected profession to go into, especially here in Australia. So that's very interesting that you...
And that is because of the fact that the police did have a different role. We went back there in the 70s and I saw policing in, that country. And you're right, so respected, so professional, educated, deals so well with community, but policing is very different across the world.
Absolutely. And you see, and I suppose you would see that now in a sense of where you are now, you've risen to the Commissioner, and you see even different states, how different states handle different things, and also internationally you can see it now from a very different perspective from the early days of, as you say, when you were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when you were 19.
Exactly, and I think you touched on a very good point. Even across the world, policing is done very differently. In the US alone, there's 18,000 law enforcement agencies. And there's 70,500 people in my organisation. So just imagine that. So it is. The standards are different. The training's different. Your policies are different. But in Australia, whilst we are slightly different, we are very, very contemporary, modern and professional policing agencies. And I think Australia has some of the best police in the world.
I think most Australians would agree with you on that. So, and absolutely. So you joined at a time in the mid-1980s, and it was a different time. I wasn't born then, but I've been told.
I like how you say that. I wasn't born then.
It was a different time, and it was a very male-dominated space in the mid-80s. What was that like for you, being a female going into such a male-dominant profession? And was there many females that went through with you in the academy?
It's such an interesting question, and I've never really thought about it until I've been asked this in recent times. I was raised in a household where it didn't matter if you're a male or female. I was on the trucks and on the bikes and in the paddock just like anyone else. And in fact, my father and mother never pointed out that I was a girl and the boys were boys. We did exactly the same thing. And then I went to a boarding school, being raised by strong, educated, independent women. And then after boarding school, I went to university and did a social welfare course, predominantly with women. It wasn't until I walked into the gates of Oxley Police Academy that I actually felt different. And I was a minority and I was a woman. We only sat at 4% women back then. Not many people had tertiary qualifications. So it was different. All of a sudden there was a lot of men and not that many women, where for me it was the flip side, prior to that. So I did feel different. I would say though at the academy, the team that I had, my squad, the facilitators were exceptional. It wasn't probably until I got into the organisation that there were points of my career that I was bitterly disappointed with how women were treated.
So would you say that you said with going, it was a very flip side, very different. Did that make you just work harder to sort of prove yourself, or was it you just thought, okay, I've just got to knuckle down and just do what I need to do?
I think it does make you work harder. Sometimes when you find yourself very different to others, you automatically think, how do I now fit in with this? Do I need to conform to achieve certain things? And I touched on before, interestingly, at the academy, and I had some really fantastic facilitators. Wayne Bennett was my, sergeant for physical education, as was Mel Meninga. I mean, they were brilliant. So again, it didn't matter, what sex we were, as long as you can do the work. But you did still feel like a minority. So I think your point is spot on, where you sometimes, as a result of that, think, what do I need to do? Do I need to do it differently? How do I really fit into this new team?
So what was it like being a sworn officer, and where was your first posting?
So first posting, because you're a trainee in the first 12 months, was just a couple of months at the city, the Watch House, Woolloongabba Station, where all the cricket was, and then a longer period at Nambour on the Sunshine Coast for about 9 months.
And what was that like for you, so you said to me that you were 19 when you went to the academy, and then once you were sworn in, had you turned 20 at that stage?
No, I was still 19.
You were still 19. So what was that like going, and what was the reception like from your colleagues when you first got to your station?
So excellent in most parts, and I'll touch on that. I think I did struggle initially, not so much struggle, but when you have so much theory and so many books thrown at you at the academy, you come out and it's terrifying, because now it's the real thing. And theory is one thing, and exercising and training and all of that's one thing, but applying it is something completely different.
Yeah, and it's, sorry to just cut you off, it's such an important point that you say, because it is, you've got to then, everything you've learned, you've got to put it into practice, and it's harder putting it into practice than it is to actually know it. And there's people that are amazing, like brain-wise, doing it practically, and I know it as being a first responder, as a firefighter myself. You see it, you can see the difference, and you would see it, yeah.
Absolute difference. Applying it is very, very, very difficult in many instances. And because policing deals with so many complex situations, the academy can't prepare you for every one of those.
No.
And some of that, in one day you can encounter, 20, 30 different situations. But it does depend on the team. It depends on your field training officer. It depends on those with experience to guide you, to help you, to actually say, well, no, that's not correct. How about you do this time? But there's so much responsibility with the badge. People look at you in the community, and expect you to have the answers. But when you are that young and you do come out and you're brand new, you don't quite have it all for quite a few years.
No, it's a good point that you touch on there, and it's a key point for young listeners of this episode is, don't be so gung-ho to actually take that step back for a minute and assess the situation before jumping in, that because you could come off worse for wear than if you just, as I've heard a few other veterans and also police people I've had on say that sometimes the older head is always good because they've been there as the young person to gung ho to get in and have a go, and sometimes just taking that step, it's a very key point you touch on, and I think anyone, when you say, when your parents go, oh, you shouldn't do that, there's a reason they're saying that, because they've done it themselves and they've come off worse for wear.
Yes, very much so, because those people have been there and they have done that. But when you come out, you haven't. So to step back and to listen and to ask questions, I remember thinking sometimes, oh God, I must sound so silly asking so many questions, but that's the only way you're going to learn.
Such a key point. And I often get told that myself, Katarina, that I get told, why do you ask so many questions? And I said, well, it's the only way to learn. And for me, especially being, when I said to you off air that I've got ADHD with learning difficulties, that was my way of learning, was I had to ask, and if I was a pain to ask, it was, I soon got, oh geez, will you go away, and you learn. So, but I think it's all part of the journey, it's all part of the experience. And for you, was there a lot of mentors in your early days of when you were in general duties?
Yes, so certainly there is the structure of our organisation is that you get allocated a field training officer and they guide you particularly through those, first years. And there's also mentoring programs. However, throughout my career, I've really kind of chosen people that I think that I want to, emulate and learn from, and then ask them to be my mentor. And I'm glad I have, because some of them, one in particular was quite brutal sometimes, but that's a good thing because I have learnt, from his good advice.
I think it's another key point you touch on is, and if you've got someone who's hard on you, it keeps you accountable, and you've got to have that accountability and in a sense it sort of lifts you to another level and makes, I know myself it does, if I'm being kept accountable, and it makes me go, okay, I've got to rise that bar a little bit more. I've got to reach that expectation. So another key point that you touch on is, accountability.
Accountability, and also honesty. He was honest with me. A lot of people find that really hard, but he had that a way of delivering a message without getting the balance right. Without being too critical, saying, look, you could have done this better, or I advise you to do it this way next time. And you need to listen to those things, because if you don't, when you have blind spots, and they're called blind spots for a reason, is that you don't quite know what it is that you're not doing well. When other people point them out to you, especially a mentor that you trust, you need to learn from that. Absolutely.
And you mentioned, so we talked about mentors, but in your early days of your career, what was the support system like for you after you, and I say that in the sense of going to death knocks, and was there support there then, and how has it improved as your career's gone on?
So support systems were very basic back then, and I think in essence the organisation was probably more basic. Life wasn't as fast paced or as complex as it is now. And our support network was more your supervisor and the team around you. And you actually had time to stop. And I know one of my first stations, Nambour, we had so many fatal crashes along the highway. So you were always on the road picking up bodies, sadly, or delivering, death messages. So you did spend a lot of time with your team working through that, especially as a young person, to be exposed to so many. Going throughout my career, those support systems got better. Peer support officers, actual psychological support, internal and external, better training for supervisors. However, I look back and I think, was it enough? But it was a different time. I look now at the complexity of life, just the digitisation of, how we, speak to each other, and the increase in mental health and the busyness in society has really required us to rethink how we provide welfare support to our people.
Absolutely. I think you've really, as you've gone through such a a digital change in policing of the old days with no computers, and then now into computers, and then technology. Now it's phone, and every and no matter what you do, as you said, you're in the public eye. Everyone wants to get their phone out now and video everything and make it when police are trying to do the right thing, and they're scrutinised. And the scrutiny in your early career, it wasn't there as much as what it is today. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Now and this is not just for policing, but everywhere you go, you're being watched somewhere. Is that a bad or good thing? I actually think it does hold us further to account. We wear body-worn videos all the time, so that's a good thing that, really tempers behaviour of sometimes not just the police but the public, because they know that they've been watched. So I think that scrutiny certainly has even added to the professionalisation of the organisation. But it is such a different life from when I started in 83 to where I am now. Most of our work is digitally on iPads that automatically, connect to the systems that we need to. And who would have thought that there would be so much change? In 1992, computers just first started coming out, I remember. And before that, we were using the old typewriters. So it has been an extraordinary amount of change in such a short time.
I'm laughing because that's the year I was born, so yeah, I'm laughing.
Oh, well, you would have seen less change than me then, Adam.
I have. But in my short 30 years, I have seen a lot too. So, but no, I laugh at that. But on reflection, how do you think you performed in those first years on the beat, and what lessons did you take away going further forward in your career?
It's interesting because you don't know how you're going sometimes unless someone tells you, because I'm one of those people that a lot of times probably very critical of myself and unsure. I'll even do a presentation now and walk away and think, oh, did I do that properly, or haven't I, or go into a meeting and still question, what I've done. So it wasn't until about 3 years in, I was at a station just here in Brisbane, and I heard my sergeant talking to someone else saying that, I listened, I was doing well, and I'm thinking, oh, thank goodness, I didn't really know that. So I think for a young person coming into an organisation, it's sometimes difficult to know how you're travelling unless someone does have those conversations with you. And I don't know if we do them enough. I think it's great to be sat down and, be told how you need to improve and where you need to improve. So when I remember listening to that, and I'm thinking, well, that's great. And then from there, I just made sure that, I worked hard, that I applied myself, that I took every development opportunity. And I thought to myself, well, that's a nice thing someone said about me. I hope that through my work, as I continue on this journey, that other people will say something similar.
That's it, and it's a key point. Again, you touched on. You've hit some great key points. You're right. I think leadership it's a very lonely road, and you're sort of the meat and the sandwich between higher up and below. And I know that myself, being a crew leader myself in being a firefighter, and it's hard. And I recently, the other day, actually had my coordinator sit down with us all and say, yes, you're actually doing a great job, Adam, and it should be done more. It should be, I think it's nice to get praise, and praise is, and I often do it for all my crew that are under me. I'll say to them every day, I say, great job, well done today, and it just makes them feel good, and I think it's just something that should be done more often, and I think it's missed there. I think we could be doing more if we. But as you say, it's a busy life, and busy. We all lead busy lives, but I think having job satisfaction and just getting that praise that can make someone's day.
Well, the evidence really does show you that it doesn't take much, and we are busy, and I think that's one of the reasons why we don't do it that much. But boy, oh boy, it has a great impact on people's lives. It just to be told you're doing a great job, keep it up. It kind of reinvigorates them to, go ahead and do new and wonderful things and keep working.
Absolutely, and for you, Your first 10 years of policing were during a very hard time in Queensland's policing and political history. How did these events affect the morale around the Queensland Police, and it led to the Fitzgerald inquiry, and what was that time like for you working through that?
So, Adam, I'm going to tell you something to interview that a lot of people don't know about. Is I was in the office that started the Fitzgerald inquiry.
All right.
There was only 20 of us in the licensing branch, and I arrived there 2 weeks before the Four Corners program. And then, and I was, I went there from the watch house wanting to work in plain clothes. And the Fitzgerald inquiry started. It was tough. It was so tough to go through a time where, a lot of people were good people in the organisation, but you had this leadership element that was, corrupt and doing horrendous things that had such a negative impact on the organisation. I often look at how difficult it was, and I just remember even patrolling the streets and people would abuse you, and it really had a terrible impact on us. But what it did do, though, is then as a result of the major reforms that we went through, and we brought a lot of tertiary education in, new development, new oversight, new systems, for everything we did in the organisation, it really brought about one of the most modern and contemporary policing agencies in the world.
I think I had this conversation with a good friend of yours, actually, Keith Banks, and he worked through the same period of time. And I said, how was it for you working through? And he said, mate, it was hard. He said because you didn't know who you could trust if you took the corruption up higher. You didn't know who you could trust. And I guess for you took a sworn oath to protect and serve. That's what you're doing for the civilians. So that would have been was that sort of, for you, was that a period where you were questioning, what am I doing in the job?
Yes, very much so, particularly because I was in that office for a period of time. Some of my old managers and supervisors did have a term of imprisonment. Others who came up with the changes went on to achieve great things in the organisation. Yes, because it was there was a dark cloud over the organisation. We didn't know what the future held. This went on for quite a few years, so it wasn't just something that happened quickly and we moved on. It kind of hung on for many years. And then you had to really, the whole organisation had to reinvigorate and reform and bring back the trust of the whole community. So it was a really, really difficult time, particularly because most people join for the right reasons, to serve and, to do wonderful things for the community. So I did think about leaving, but because of the changes that got brought in as a result of the reform, and I stayed on in the licensing branch, oh, thank goodness, because it was the most wonderful time to be in the organisation as we went through reforming the organisation into what it is today.
And I said this to Keith as well on his podcast. It's what happened in Queensland happened in New South Wales as well. They had the Royal Commission into the King's Cross and all the policing that. So it must happen through. It shouldn't happen, but it seemed to happen through organisations, and I think it's a great, as you said, it was a great time. It was a bad time, but then it was a great time coming post the Fitzgerald inquiry and what, as you said, the development that, and sort of brought the policing into the 21st century of what the organisation is today, what it looks like. The branding was tarnished, but then now the branding it's back to where it should be. So
it wasn't just good as a whole organisation and the building of the public trust, but it was also good within the organisation. Education standards changed, promotion on merit. There were really good processes put in place, for complaint systems and discipline and dealing with, these corruption issues with an external oversight body. So all of those new structures and frameworks came in place as well. So I think whilst it came from a dark place, it came to a very good place into the future. And and I always say it's the worst thing you could go through, but it was one of the best things to bring us out the other end.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? When you at the time you think, oh geez, is this ever going to end? And then you come out the other side and it's, oh okay, we've gone forward, we're past that now.
Yeah, we're in a lot better place as a result.
Absolutely. And so you went to the drug squad as a detective. What made you choose the drug squad?
When I look back, I'm not quite sure, actually. I did know, I always say this about policing, it's like 100 jobs in one. And if you'd looked at my career, you'll see that I've moved a lot. 2-3 years, I move on. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to ensure that I experienced as much of the organisation as I could. Particularly, I looked at some of my colleagues who had stayed in one place for 10, 15, 20 years. And one of the things that came out of Fitzgerald is this whole thing of actually renewing and moving and, learning and making sure that you don't stay in one place for too long. So I did go to the drug squad straight after licensing branch for a period of 3 years, and I absolutely loved it. I went in as an investigator, a controller of drug operations, as well as doing some undercover work myself. So it was a very exciting time of the organisation.
So, and I like what you're saying that you shouldn't. I like that you are 2 to 3 years and then move on. That's a great. It shows that you don't become stale. And I say that in the nicest sense to people. Some people, it's their absolute passion. They love doing that. That's their chosen field. They love it. That's where they want to be. But I think you've got to develop. You've got to have that self-development and keep growing and keep yourself going, well, what's next? What's the next, where's the next step going to be? Because otherwise you sort of get comfortable and you got to challenge yourself to get to that next uncomfortable zone, as they call it.
Yeah, I actually don't mind feeling uncomfortable. In any new job, you're going to go through that, but it's really interesting. It's horses for courses. I've looked at people in their specialist roles and they've stayed there for a considerable period, and I think, oh my God, thank God you do, because we would not have this capability or capacity without you. And yet, like myself, others move on. So I think for an organisation, you need that nice balance. You need that nice balance of people staying in that really critical roles for longer, but others to take new ideas, from one place to the other and to learn from each of those. But for myself, I have been one of those that likes moving and learning new things and taking those skills that I've learnt there onto somewhere else. Absolutely,
and I think it's a good trait to have that. Yeah, that why there's people that are amazing and do what they do. I think, such as an organisation like the police, is you've got a real opportunity to grow and go wherever you want to go. In some organisations or some chosen fields, you sort of get to a point and that's it. You can't grow any further. As the police, there's so many avenues that are open that you can go anywhere you want to go. So I think it's a great thing to anyone who listens to this, is that if you are thinking of going into the police or fire service or ambulance, or there is room to grow and there is room to move. So, and it's a great thing.
I think you make a very good point. I think people look at policing in some of those organisations and just think there's just one component of it. There isn't. There's hundreds. And when you move on to somewhere else, it's like almost entering a new job, and it reinvigorates you. And that's why you find in policing and some of these professions that people stay for a long time, because there is actually a lot of different areas where you get that feeling of going to a new role.
Well, I think it's another key point you touch on, is that, like as you say, whenever you change departments, or you are starting basically from who you were as the drug squad is totally different to who you are as the commissioner. You're a totally different person, and you've got to meet that role. It's a different role from where you were. You've got to prove yourself.
Different roles, different people, and different teams as well.
That's right.
So it is quite new each time, and I think that's a great thing, because it kind of reinvigorates you as a person. You have new experiences, and then, as you say, you get this opportunity just to keep moving and doing new things.
So you mentioned that you went undercover, and what was that like for you? Was that exhilarating? And
I take my hat off because for many years I was actually a controller of people in the undercover roles, and I did it, a bit myself. I did it, and I won't go into too much detail, but certainly, it's different. You're infiltrating a world that you would not normally hang out in or live in, but it's such an important role to be able to get, the evidence we need to do certain things. People think they're tough roles. Sometimes I think people think it's glamorous and how wonderful it is, but important roles and difficult roles, and I sometimes look back at that and I think, oh, who would have thought I would have ever found myself in these situations? But again, another element to what I did, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
And so as you said, you progressed your career, you finished your time in the drug squad, and then you worked in the criminal investigation branches, and where some of your roles included working with the Commission of Inquiry, the Joint Crime Task Force, and the Covert Unit. Without going into too much detail, what did these roles entail for you?
Well, and then I think it just goes to that conversation that we've just had. I move a lot, don't I? Every one of them was slightly different. I worked in a Commission of Inquiry into a mental health facility, Ward 10B in Townsville, and this was working with doctors and lawyers, to work through what happened in this ward over an extensive period of time working with mental health patients. It was fascinating, something a police officer would not normally do. But my role as an investigator was to see if any offences had been, committed in that area. And then I went to what's now CCC, but it was the CJC back then, the Criminal Justice Commission, where I worked with the National Crime Authority in Italian organised crime for 2 years, following, Italians growing massive, drug plantations. So I did that. So my whole career has been, well, I've been blessed, really. I've been truly blessed because I've worked in some fascinating areas where every 2 or 3 years I've gone to this new experience that I've thoroughly enjoyed.
I'm going to throw in there that I've, as you say, and we said at the start of the podcast, is that work ethic. I often speak to people, and I've had many veterans and first responders on the podcast, and they say, I'm so blessed, and it's hard work too. It doesn't just happen. You've got to put in the hard work, and you've obviously done that, and you've shown that. So yeah, I'm gonna give you it's not just, you're not blessed, it's hard work as well. So, and that is something that you've had from an early age from your family.
And you are spot on. It is hard work, and I look at some of those places, and boy, oh boy, it was hard work. But I also look at the team beside me who worked so hard. And some of those people, I look at the Ward 10B inquiry that was in Townsville, go on to be Supreme Court judges, the head of the CCC. I look at internally the people I've worked with who have worked just as hard as I have gone on to achieve, incredible things inside the organisation and outside. So I think if you work hard in those difficult environments and you have a great team, that you actually do go on to achieve, even better things in life.
It's positive influences are amazing. They really inspire you to keep pushing yourself higher than your limits that you set yourself. And I think if you're surrounded by negative people, it can have it has the other effect. As positive influences are amazing, and they really drive you on. And I've known that too in my short years of surrounding myself with positive people. I'm doing things now that I never thought I would do in my life. Like sitting here across from you, I never ever imagined that I would be sitting here talking to a police commissioner. Like that just never entered my head. But it's when and people have said to me, how do you, Adam, like, wow, how did that? And I said, you just ask there. And what the answer could be no, and that's okay. It's fine. You just go, okay, well, I'll try and get someone else. And that's how I've lived. That's how I live my life. You're just an ordinary person, just like me. And you just ask, and if you don't ask, you never know. So that's how I look at it.
I think you are spot on. I think people look at people in those high, those roles and think, oh my God, they must be different or whatever. No, they're human at the end of the day. They went on the same journey you and I have been on. And most people say yes. It's really interesting. And I think you are correct. If you're surrounded by a good, positive team, that will always have that positive impact, and that will breed success in the future. But, before this podcast started, we were talking about the negative things that happen in our lives, how sometimes when someone makes that negative comment or does that, it actually inspires you
Absolutely. Yeah,
to succeed in spite of that.
It's the fuel. It's a fuel added to the fire that you go, yeah, I'm gonna prove you wrong. And yeah, I've done that. I think you've done that a few times in your career too. And it's going a big, well, up yours. I'm going to prove you wrong. And yeah,
I'll show you.
Yeah, that's right. So in 2008, you were awarded the Australian Police Medal, so APM, in the Australia Day Honours. What does this award mean to you? And is it for you, is it a reflection of the hard work of your policing career, or what does it mean to you?
I think, Adam, that is it. In policing and in public service roles and roles that we do, you don't get those big, private industry bonuses and things like that. You do it because you love what you do. You love serving the community. You love helping people, and it's a form of recognition, and it does mean a lot. It means that you've worked hard in your chosen field, and you've been recognised for it. My children look at the medals I wear sometime. I have a 80 and a 21-year-old, and over the years they go, "Mum, what does that medal mean?" And I say, "It means Mum's tired and Mum's old." They go, "Oh, Mum, it doesn't really," but and that's just a joke. But, you do that to recognise people for what they've done, and I think is incredibly important.
Absolutely. And as we've said throughout the podcast, is recognition. Recognition goes such a long way. And you're right, it's... in the public service, you don't get that big paycheck of, the bonus that comes. You do it for the love of serving your community, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And yes, you could go private sector and earn a lot more money, but it's the willingness to serve and the willingness to give back. And I think it's recognition of the hard work you've done. And so in 2012, you were the operations commander of the G20 summit. What was involved in your role, and what did you do across the operation?
So I think I was the Assistant Commissioner in charge of the northern region that goes from, Cairns to the Torres Strait. And I desperately wanted to come back to Brisbane, and the Commissioner back then said, the only way that you're going to come back to Brisbane is if you take on this, Operations Commander role for G20, because we knew that it was going to be in Brisbane. Around the executive leadership team at the time, I think we're all dreading who was going to be chosen, because if you look at the history of G20, it's mayhem across the world, depending on what country it was in. And it was in Canada, and they had a massive, lawsuit outstanding because of the way that it was handled. So he said, well, the only way you're going to come back here is if you do G20. I thought, I was nearly sick. I'm thinking, no way. But I thought, wow, here's an opportunity. Here is... There's not many people in the world that can say that you've commanded the biggest peacetime operation in Australia's history. And it was and still is. It was 26 world leaders, even though it was a G20, you get to invite others. To have the most powerful leaders in the world in your patch for this entire weekend, where it took us 2 years to plan that security environment. So I was the operations commander of several thousand, about 7,000 police officers, 3,500 Queensland and 3,500 from other jurisdictions. And there was around 10,000, other security, as well as 1,000 ADF. It was massive. I think the first few months when I came into that role, I just could not see how we were going to get to the end, because there's millions of moving parts. And it wasn't until a few months into it that we'd settled the program and everyone knew, what work had to be done. And it was truly successful. But would I have done things differently? Definitely. Only learned things along that journey. And at the end of the day, if it wasn't successful, my head was on the chopping block, I'd say, because, it wouldn't have succeeded, because it was, I was the driving force behind it. It was the first time in my life that I think I've really experienced stress, to the extent that, it was how are we going to get through this over the next 2 years? I remember the Courier Mail did an article on me that if I did succeed, you know, I could go on and achieve other things. And if I didn't, I'd be on the sideline watching my kids play soccer. And I'm thinking, well, that's spot on, really, isn't it? Yeah, so there was a lot of pressure, a lot of public pressure. But it's one of those opportunities that you grab it. You have that leadership role to, you know, to really mould this into what you think it should be like. And we did such amazing, innovative things that I had a very supportive leadership that allowed us to do that, which is incredibly important. And as a result, really changed the business model. So it was a tough couple of years, but very enjoyable.
Well, I was going to ask you on that. If you said that you felt stress for the first time on a different level, I'll say that, in your policing career. What outlets do you do to relieve that stress? Like, do you do sport? Do you do yoga? What do you do to relieve that stress?
So, I just want to go back to a point that you made, because it was stress on a different level. It was a very public role, and it was a very international role. So it just took what we were doing to another level, and I was very mindful of that, because if it didn't succeed, it would be a bad legacy, not only for my organisation, but the state, the country, and the pressure of that was just quite extraordinary. So it's very hard, you know, people go, what do you have for a hobby? Well, I don't really have many hobbies at the moment. I just figure that's the next chapter of my life. I'm looking forward to that chapter. But I do like walking. I do like when I'm in a stress situation like that, I find if I can talk or relate to or take up with people who've been in a similar situation is incredibly important. The team around you is your lifeline, not only at work but at home. That is incredibly important. So if you've not walked in those shoes, it's really hard to understand what someone's going through. And a number of times, even when I've come into this role, I've talked to past commissioners, present commissioners, Christine Nixon, who was in Victoria. My goodness me, you learn so much from people who've been in very similar shoes to your own.
Absolutely. And I think I want to go back on a point that you had 26 diplomats from other countries. Was that in itself, you had to deal with their policing teams, their security teams? And what was that like, being in different languages? And that would have been a challenge in its own right.
So, yes, I did get to meet the President as a result, actually, because we had a wonderful relationship with the Secret Service.
Yes, right.
And the FBI and their home, office. So you establish very close relationships, particularly with the security of the Prime Minister or the President, and with some nations more than others. So over the years, we had, I would say, several hundred stakeholders. And against each stakeholder, we had a communications and an engagement plan, because they were critical. The community of Brisbane was one, our businesses were another. Each leader was one, each leader's security, was one. So we spent a lot of time briefing, sharing information, liaising. Each police service was, a partner and a relationship that we had as well. And some, as you can appreciate, and I could write a whole book on this,
yes,
were easier to deal with than others. But I think that's life. We had wonderful relationships with most, and we spent a couple of years just working on relationships and making sure that we had a really workable relationship with each country and their entourage.
Well, I should mention that the G20 summit it was fantastically run. It went off without a hitch, so that was well done to that. Well done for you and your team for doing that. And in December 2014, you were appointed Acting Commissioner of the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, and officially given the role on the 1st of August 2015. How did this come about, considering where you were working in the G20 summit and then now going to this role?
It's funny, I couldn't wait to have a few weeks off because I was exhausted. I think I had a week off in that prior 2 years. And I looked at having 6 weeks off, and I had a phone call from the then Premier asking me to come over to this new department in an interim role. And it's very hard to say no to our Premier because it's kind of can affect your future career, I think. So off I went, and it was a new department. So it was 4 new agencies in one: Rural Fire Service, SCS, Fire and Rescue, and Disaster Management Queensland. And you would appreciate this from your background. You know, each had different heritages, history, ways of working, uniforms, culture, processes, systems. It just went on and on and on. But there was also a damning report into a part of the organisation in terms of, culture, of particularly around a bad incident that happened. So I was asked to go in and commence reform of a new department with these recommendations. And it was tough. I look at the change that we brought about in delivering G20, but that wasn't cultural change. Whether you were Prime Minister and Cabinet or you were the US Secret Service, you all were heading towards the same goal. You all wanted that successful outcome. You wanted that same big picture at the end of the day. But going into departments to bring about cultural change and bringing departments together is incredibly difficult. And I think when you read that out, you would note that I was still a police officer for the first several months, and that had never happened before, and it was tough.
And it's a key point you touch on is culture in an organisation. If it's set, it is so hard to break, and it can be. And if you've got a positive, it's fantastic. It's everyone wants to be there, everyone wants to work, everyone wants to be a part of it. But if you've got that negative culture, it is it's like Groundhog Day. You just, every day you go, why? And I had this. I've had this, so I know what it's like. And that's as far as I'll go with that one. And it is negative influences. If they're in the organisation, it is so quick to have a sinking ship with negativity than it is with, and it's so hard to change that culture. And as you say, you had four agencies virtually amalgamating into this new structure, and as you say, they've got certain ways, certain things that they do different to the other, like the Rural Fire Service does things different to Fire Rescue. So the moving parts, it would have been a challenge. And what did you take away from this role?
Oh, I walked in there thinking, G20 seems easy compared to this. and you're spot on about culture, because the other thing is with culture is not all culture's bad. I look at all of those agencies within QFES, they had amazing good culture. And aspects in some parts of it may have been bad, but they are very similar to policing. They are, we all want to be good people who help the community, and we work hard to achieve that. So I think when people talk about culture, you shouldn't always think, oh my God, everyone in that organisation has a negative culture, because most people have actually great cultures. Yeah. So I think the difficulty was that everyone was very different, and all of a sudden we've come into one agency. So how do we work together as one, but still maintaining your identity and still maintaining your role and your history and, the way you do business? It was tricky, one of the first discussions was, do we all wear the same uniform colour or don't we? And we decided to separate them, because you join Fire and Rescue for a reason, you join SCS for a reason. So we kept the agencies but separate, but better in line in the way that they work. So it was QFES, many capabilities, one QFES, many capabilities, and we moved on with it. So I learnt so much. I learned about reform, change, how hard it is, how it's important to be very clear with your vision, to ensure that many stakeholders are involved and a part of that journey, and that you go around and listen to your team and know how tough they're doing it. And in fact, those people will be on the journey if they know why and how we're going to get there.
So with that, did you have they amalgamated all into one? So you were the overall commissioner, and you had the commissioners of Fire Rescue and all that report to you. Is that how it worked?
No, I was the commissioner and I had deputies.
Right,
yes,
okay.
So the head of that department, like the Director General, CEO, Commissioner, and there were 3 deputies, and one sat over the operations like the fire and rescue side of the house, the volunteers, and then the strategy and performance. And that was the first cut. It's changed again since then, but we achieved so much in such a short time frame. And I was there for 4.5 years, and I've got to say, to my QFES colleagues, I absolutely loved the time that I was there, and I would never give it away. I learnt so many things, made so many friends, and really puts you into good stead, to do other things into the future.
Well, we'll get into that now, and you've just mentioned that you learnt so much in that job. And on the 23rd of April 2019, Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk announced that you would succeed Ian Stewart as the Commissioner of the Queensland Police upon Stewart's retirement in July 2019. You were appointed the Queensland Police Commissioner on the 8th of July 2019. What does it mean to you to be the first female Queensland Police Commissioner?
That's an interesting one, because I don't think of it that I'm the first female commissioner. I think, and I know it's incredibly important, don't get me wrong, I think it's those milestones is incredibly important, for, policing had been around for 150 years and they've never had a, female leader, neither had QFES. So I think those firsts are so important for society, for the community, for women, for organisations. But when I look back at those appointments, I don't sit there and think, oh my God, I was the first one. I think everyone is like this. You got there, you get on and you do your job, basically. But having said that, that is important though, because it is, I often get told sometimes it's very hard to be unless you see. So I've had so many women come up to me and say, look, this is fantastic because it really inspires that next generation, that women. So I think it is incredibly important, but I don't often see myself as anything great or important for achieving that, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
I think, like, I'm going to say this to you because I had a discussion with one of the very first Navy commanders, and she's a lovely lady, and she said to me, Adam, I don't see myself as a trailblazer. I don't see myself as... I was just in my era, just doing my thing, and I said, well, Sandy, you are a trailblazer. You have set the bar for women going forward now. Like they are because of your hard work, they are where they are today. And I said to her, you should reflect on that. There was a lot of firsts. She was mentioned in Parliament, and it was a big deal. And I'm like, this is big. And she said, well, I just don't see it like that. And same for you. It's just part of the job. But I think in today's society, I think we're guilty of not stopping and reflecting as we should. And I think you should stop and reflect that it's a massive first. And I think it's great admiration for anyone who is looking to join the police force and go, well, you can start as a plain, as a constable on the streets, and if you work hard enough, you can get and be the commissioner and be at the top and be a trailblazer. And I think I'm going to ask you this, is when you first joined the police 40 years ago, and I don't mean to use your age there, 40 years ago, did you ever see yourself being the commissioner?
Goodness, no. I think to Sandy's point, I think it's a point in time. You work hard, you take your opportunities, you love what you're doing. And I've always looked to just that next level. And particularly with my family, my husband, my children, every decision we kind of made on that journey, it was kind of together. When I needed to move to take a promotion, we'd sit down and say, should we move? Should we take this promotion? But there's many levels between myself and the constable on the ground, 10 ranks actually. You can never sit there as a constable and think, oh, I'm going to be that person. In fact, I think there'd be nothing worse, because you would lose the lessons you learn. You would not. I don't think you'd have as much fun on the journey, thinking, "Oh my God, I've got to, concentrate on being the commissioner." That just is mind-boggling. I think you just need to enjoy what you're doing, work hard. Yes, go for it. Don't get me wrong. I've set goals and I've moved towards those goals, but it's always been more that next level, and it's always been a decision, more involving my family, and even decisions, with my mentors and past leaders in the organisations, asking, where do you think I should go? Why should I go there? What do you think I should be getting out of this organisation? So I think sometimes you just got to relax, enjoy the journey, and it will be what it'll be.
I think that's a really great point to touch on. And I think, so for you mentioned, like, as you say, a constable going up 10 ranks to commissioner. And commissioner is you've got to make different decisions. You've got different things there's stakeholders, you've got to report to people. So it's very different. And how do you deal with, and I'll say this, how do you deal with the criticism that sometimes is unfairly labelled at you? How do you deal with that and being the commissioner, knowing that everyone's got an opinion because you're in the public eye, everyone's got an opinion of, well, I'd do this and I'd do this different. How do you cope with that?
Oh, I've actually been told that. People have said to me, well, I would have made a different decision. And that's actually what leadership is about. Many of us, we do things very, very differently, and as a result, you'll have a different outcome. I know that someone who did G20 would have delivered such a different product from me because they would have done it differently as a leader. And I made a decision the other day, ultimately, about LVNRs. They're the lateral, vascular neck restraints. And as a result of a working group and getting all of this information, I decided to withdraw them as a use of force option. That was a tough decision. It was a tough decision because we've always had it in our training curriculum. A tough decision because people use it naturally, in dangerous situations. But I was faced with overwhelming evidence that we should not have it anymore, and and a lot of external stakeholders very, in many ways, angry that QPS was the only organisation that had it, and I withdrew it. And there were a lot of people in the organisation that were angry with me. 12,500 police, had trained in this for many, many years. And criticism's not easy, but I think, and no one really likes being criticised a lot constantly. It can have a lot to, negative impact on your health, and it goes on. But I think if you can rest at night knowing that you've done everything in your power to make the right decision for the right reasons, that's what you need at the end of the day to live with yourself. I went on as a result of, making this decision to push out to the organisation further reasons why. And in fact got some nice responses acknowledging how tough it is. I've got to be able to live with myself on the decisions I make. And I consider as much as I can in every decision. Again, I turn to a good team to really bounce things off. I've got a great executive leadership team and the deputies that sit around me, and even at home. I think that team often makes you a great leader because they give you good sound advice, or they tell you not to do things, or even the way that we word our, information internally is incredibly important. So you depend on good advice, you depend on good information to make those decisions. But if you've done all you can to make the best decision, that's all you can do at the end of the day.
Absolutely. It's a really great takeaway there. And I want to ask you this, and it's probably a hard question. It may be an easy question for you to answer, but being commissioner, and most people know that policing is a very dangerous job, and you're the commissioner. How does it affect you when your policing colleagues go out on duty and can be badly hurt or even killed? How does that affect you as a commissioner?
Very hard. Very hard. shouldn't have asked me that question.
I'm sorry to. I didn't mean
Sadly,
to.
we've had in the last 2 years 3 people killed, and Dave Masters in 2021 and our 2 young police officers last year, Matt and Rachel. And we're talking about people who are just the most amazing humans on earth. And the way they have died is just so wrong. And it's tough because I look at them like my children. I'm responsible for them. Yeah. I'm responsible for their safety, their training. I know what good people they are, and sadly, when they do pass, I actually get to be very good friends with their family, and their families are just as amazing. And you look at your own family, and I think, I don't know how they're going to live through this. And it's bad enough for the organisation, let alone the families. But I think as a commissioner and as the QPS, all we can do is support them as much as we can, to know that we're always going to support them, to know that the families that are left will always be part of the organisation. But it's tough. It's tough on the team. It's tough on the whole organisation. And as I said, families will never recover.
And I'm sorry to make you cry. That wasn't my intention when I asked that question. I didn't mean that. I think you're right. I think, and you're a mother. You've mentioned that, and you mother instinct comes in, and any mother or father would be in the same position as you, that you're only human. And I think to see a raw side of you with your emotions, I can see you are passionate about, you put your uniform on every day. You are passionate about serving the community, and I can see that firsthand. And I am sorry that I made you cry. It was first for me, making a police commissioner cry.
Hey,
so.
Don't tell too many people, or your listeners will find out.
Yeah, so
I just think it's it is tough, because you don't sit up here and not have feelings. In fact, you're very, very passionate about what you do, and I'm very responsible for my people. They mean the world to me. I know that if I'm going to get a phone call at 2 or 3 in the morning, that it's never good news.
No,
good news.
Nothing ever comes good in the hours of the morning.
And there for a commissioner, that's the greatest dread you have, is that you're going to lose someone, when you're the commissioner. And I wish that never, ever has to happen to anyone, to any commissioner ever.
And I think...
to any organisation ever.
I think it's a key point you touch on there with no one... There's no advice. There's no training. Like you can... Being commissioner, it's very different to giving a death knock. I would understand that it's very different. And am I right in saying that the training, you have to do it yourself? It's you have to work out your processes of how to cope with that you may lose your family, your police family?
Yeah, it is. It's probably and in some ways, one of the loneliest aspects of the job, because it's spending time with all of those colleagues, in the aftermath, which goes on for years. There's a great sadness, in the families, in the colleagues, in the organisation. And I look at the memorial wall and know a lot, I've known those people that have passed away. You celebrate their lives, but at the end of the day, the organisation is worse off as a result of losing those people.
It is so true, and I'm nearly getting emotional myself, because it is. I think any loss of anyone is because whether you know the person or not, they're a human being, and they mean something to someone. They've got families, brothers, sisters. They're an uncle. They're an auntie. They're a brother, a mother, a father. So they matter to someone, and I think you're right in you're right in what you say that, yeah, it is hard. It's very hard. And I know we went through a similar situation where we lost a few in our 2019-2020 season of bushfires, and that hit us all hard. It actually, if I'm being honest, it made us sort of stop and look at, oh geez, like you don't know every time you go out that you will come back. There's that sense of, yeah, it is a very dangerous job, and any first response, and you've only got to look last week in where the paramedic was killed, and it's no one deserves to go, or no one should feel that they go to work to die. It's something that you're serving your community. Everyone has the right to go home to their family.
It's really, I think, because we're in a service community organisation, police, fire, ambulance, it's even more touching and it's even sadder because the people that pass away in their execution of their duty join to serve others. They are genuinely the best people you can have in your community, and they join these organisations to make a difference. So it has this added element of sadness, and distress and, tragedy built to it. So, so I think it is tough for organisations. It's tough for those directly around them. But for their families, I know for families, they never get over it.
No, and it's like that, as you say, I'll use a medical term, it's the wound that never heals. It will never, and in a sense, there's no closure. There's no close. Like, yes, you can have your funeral and all that sort of thing, but the tragedy of it's the tragedy of the circumstances of, and I don't think the families ever truly recover. As you say, they never recover.
No, there's no closure because you'll never get the answer as to why.
That's right. Exactly. Such a key point. And so for you mentioned the police remembrance wall, and if you've had a bad day, do you often go and reflect on the names, and what do those names mean to you as Commissioner?
I think names on the wall, they're symbolic, but they're so important. They're so important, and I touched on it before, the names on the walls. I knew a lot of those people. And, you think about them often throughout your life and throughout the year, particularly those in my term. I think about them always, David, Rachel and Matt. But those names just make you stop and think they dedicate their life, for making the community safer. And it's so important that the names are there, that we will always remember that, and remember that long past when I leave, but forever. Their names will always be there because they made the ultimate sacrifice to make their community safer.
Pretty powerful words. And it's something, in a sense, that the military live by too, when they say the ode, and I think it's you're right, remembrance. It's not a thing of, we've got Anzac Day coming up and I know that'll be a busy time for you as well, being that you've got to provide security to events and things like that. And I think you're right. I think we're not glorifying war. We're remembering the fallen that have gone and paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms. And you're right. Those names on that police remembrance wall, they paid the ultimate sacrifice, and in service of their community and in service of their state. And I think you're right that those names are etched into that wall forever. And I think it's our duty to remember them as not just police, but everyone, civilians as well, and know that these people signed on to do a job. And I'm using all of us here, veterans, first responders. We sign on to do a job that a lot of people don't want to do, and it is a very hard job. It's a very challenging, and as you've said, it can be a very rewarding job, but it's also a very dangerous job at the same time.
It is, and it's important to remember. And just by having that name, and I always know when I stand in front of a memorial wall, the ones that I don't know of. I always wonder who was their mum, who was their dad, how did their life end, did they have family, who did they leave behind? I think it's important to just sit there and consider what a positive impact they would have had on their community in terms of safety, but how their death has just caused so much heartache.
Absolutely. Well, and I want to ask you this, because so Katarina, when you call time on your career, what do you want your legacy to be as Commissioner?
To make sure that in some way that I have left it a better place, but that people know that throughout that period that I did everything that I could to make it better for them, but that I genuinely cared for them as well, and that I leave it better than when it was when I got into the organisation. I mean, I think most leaders genuinely want that, because that's what you're there for. Absolutely.
And I've only just met you, but sitting across from you, I can sense that. I can sense there's a care for your people, and I think you're not human if you're not caring, if that makes sense, because it's the care factor is there. You have to care. So, and I think you're well on your way to doing that. So well done on that. And what advice would you give any person who wants to join the Queensland Police Service?
That it is an organisation of service, and that's why we joined. And if you were to just look at my career, that it is many services within one service, and it is a great organisation. We are on a bit of a recruiting drive, and I always say it is 100 jobs in one. Come and join the QPS.
There you go. So anyone listening, if you live in Queensland, come and join the QPS. So, and knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would she listen?
Yeah, I looked at all your questions, Adam. I reckon that's the toughest one, too. Trust yourself. Your journey might be challenging, but it'll be amazingly rewarding.
And I think I want to add something, and tell me if I'm wrong here. Back yourself as well. Would you say back then, or was it always confidence has been something that you've always had?
Back yourself, but listen. And take advice.
I like that. That's good. I like that. That's a good one. So any young listener, listen to your elders. They know they've been there and done that, as I know myself. So
I think that's an important point. When you're young, you have not yet been there and done that, and people give you advice for a reason.
That's right, and most of the time it's to stop pain and suffering. So, and I know I've sat there as I've hit 30. I sit there with my parents now and go, "Yeah, you were right. I probably should have done that and listened to you." And yeah, so it's as you say, if it's warranted good advice. If it's bad advice, we don't advocate for that.
Yeah, and look, you mostly put your faith in good people, so I would hope that the advice from that good person is what you should listen to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I've got one last question that I want to ask you, and it's a bit of a funny one. So, it could be a bit controversial too. So, as Commissioner, would you be for or against Batman, and why?
Wow, I think you hit it on the head where it could be a bit of a controversial one. So let's answer this from two aspects, okay? From a fictional aspect, oh, great, I love Batman. Fights for his community, he's out there. But as the commissioner, QPS or any commissioner, they would be saying, well, vigilantism is probably not the right thing to do, let me tell you. It could whilst we get why people might want to do that, it could just get you in a bit of strife. So I'm kind of a bit of a bit twisted as to what I should say in this.
I thought I'd throw that in just at the end, just to create a bit of spice. So, and you've answered that really well, so well done. And I want to finish. There's a quote that I would, and a prayer that I would like to finish with you. And I'm going to say this, Katarina. Your story is one of true inspiration. Although you think it's not, it is. You've certainly been an influence to so many women to strive to be a leader in their chosen field. You have served your community with honour and served your state and your family with pride. The quote is, "True leadership lies in guiding others to success, in ensuring that everyone is performing at their best, doing the work they are pledged to do and doing it well. Bravery is not the absence of fear, but the action in the face of fear." I believe this sums you up and your career. And I would like to finish with this quote. It's this prayer. St. Michael, prayer for police officers. St. Michael, we ask that you protect our brave police officers against those with malice and ill will. They're our first responders and our protectors from violence, robbery and wickedness. Please walk beside them and protect them as they protect us. Amen. Commissioner, it has been an honour and a privilege to have you on True Blue Conversations. I want to thank you for your service and sharing your story today.
Thank you, Adam. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts.